Hello, I'm Gary Girolimon, race director of the Glen Lake Swim and a fan of cryptological creatures. Joining me today is Elaine Howley. Elaine is a writer, artist, the race director of the Boston Lake Swim, and is a marathon swimmer. She's done the triple crown of solo lake monster swims, including Lake Tahoe, Lake Memphre, and Loch Ness itself. Elaine and I will be having a conversation with Tony Harmsworth. Tony has spent the last 40 years living on the shores of Loch Ness. He's considered to be one of the foremost authorities on the granddaddy of lake monsters, Nessie. Tony conceived, designed, created, and co-founded the official Loch Ness Monster Exhibition Center and was the administrative coordinator of Operation Deep Scan during the 1980s. Tony is the author of many books, including Loch Ness, Nessie Me, the definitive book about the Loch Ness Monster. Welcome, Tony.
Hello, nice to see you.
Please tell us a little bit about Loch Ness itself, its location, size, climate, and other characteristics.
Loch Ness is quite big, but I think when you're actually standing on the side of it, it looks bigger than it really is. It's about 23 miles long, 22, 23, depending on where you measure it from. And it's very cold water. The top meter or two can actually become warmer in the summer, but throughout the year, its average temperature is 42 degrees. That's Fahrenheit. So very cold. It's very steep-sided and extremely deep. So it's 230 meters, that's 750 feet deep. So a huge volume of water. There's actually more water in Loch Ness than there is in all the lakes, all the rivers, all the reservoirs of England and Wales combined in this one body of water. If we could find a way of bottling it, we'd make a fortune. It's a very beautiful loch, lovely place to look at.
Elaine has swum the 22-mile length of Loch Ness. Elaine, what was that like? And Tony, is there an enthusiastic swimming community in Loch Ness? Can you, both of you, tell us a little bit about, what swimming there is like?
Yeah, so for me, Loch Ness was far and away the hardest marathon swim I've ever done. Took me about 13 and a half hours to do the 22.2 miles from Fort Augustus to Loch End. And I swam in August, and the water was started out at 51 degrees Fahrenheit, which I guess is at about 10 and a half, 11 degrees Celsius. So a long, cold swim, a very hard swim, but definitely one of the more beautiful adventures I've had.
And Sarah Thomas swam with you that day as well.
Yeah, Sarah Thomas swam the same day. So did Craig Lenning, who's also from Denver, a good friend of Sarah's. So the three of us went over together, and I'll tell you what, that peer pressure made all the difference for me, knowing that those other two swimmers, all three of us were doing solo swims, but knowing that those other swimmers were out there the same day really kept me going, because it was so cold and I was so uncertain I was going to make it, but knowing that they were out there definitely helped.
I was in a support boat with a man called David Morgan, who set a record of 10 hours, 50 minutes, and then turned around and swam back and set 22 hours and 50 minutes roughly for the two-way world record.
That's amazing. I didn't know that you had been on the boat with him. That's so cool, because that is just, to me, that feat is just superhuman, because I know how hard it was to go one length. I can't imagine doing a double of that lake. I mean, that's just, next level. So Tony, there's an abundance of lake monster mysteries at various places around the globe. In fact, it feels a lot like every lake has a monster, a resident monster of some sort. Can you talk a little bit about, some of Nessie's counterparts around the world, and maybe a little bit about why so many lakes seem to have resident creatures?
I think the very question helps you towards an answer that if you're a parent living beside one of these lakes, you're going to say to the children, don't go near the water. There's a monster in the water. And so probably a lot of it comes from that. In Scotland, we have several. Loch Morar has Morag, and Loch Lochy has what they call Lizzie. So we do have some over here. Certainly there's Lake Tahoe. Lake Champlain is quite well known over here. And I used to be in touch with Joe Zazinski over there, who was the researcher for Lake Champlain. And of course you have this Memphre, how do you say the damn thing? Memphre Magog, is it? And of course, you've got your Glennie. But most of the Scottish lochs do have a folklore aspect to them, that there's some sort of water creature. Sometimes it's called the water Kelpie. And there's a little story at Loch Ness that about the water Kelpie. St. Columba had a sighting of something in Loch Ness. Well, it was actually in the River Ness, sometime around the 6th century. But when he was on his way back to the west coast, he stopped at a castle. It wasn't a castle then, it was just a house. And when he came away from the house, there was a field and there was a horse looking over a fence. And he was with his group there, and he went up to the horse and he realized straight away that this was the water horse. Now the water horse will stand there beside the road, looking all the while like a free horse to give you a ride to wherever you're going. And the moment you get on its back, it turns back into a fearsome creature, drags you into the depths and devours you. And St. Columba told this water Kelpie that the owner of the house on the side of Loch Ness had converted to Christianity, and he was never hurt anyone in Loch Ness ever again.
With Nessie in particular, though, my understanding is that the whole folklore around Nessie herself started to really gain steam in the 1930s with the surgeon's photo and the building of the new road that went around the loch. Can you talk a little bit more about, how Nessie became the cultural phenomenon that she is? And I use right. She, I mean, obviously there's got to be he Nessies if we're going to have perpetual Nessies, right? But, I don't know. Tell me more about that.
Well, the road had been opened from Inverness to Drumnadrochit, and the lady who was a manager at the Drumnadrochit Hotel. She and her husband were coming back from Inverness. And actually, you could be very cynical about this and say, she's a hotelier, she'd want to encourage people to come. But I met her, and I was there when we interviewed her. And I don't think there was any commercialization involved in what she was doing. But as they approached Loch End, she looked towards Aldari Castle, which is a rather beautiful castle on the southern side of the loch. And something came up. Now that's very rare. Most people do not see something rise up out of the water. It's already there usually. Now Mrs. Mackay said it came up. She shouted for her husband to stop the car. He couldn't. There was a car behind him. So he had to slow down and pull over when he could. By the time he did that, whatever it was gone, but there was just a wake. And Mrs. Mackay saw this thing go round in the circle and submerge. A friend of mine, a BBC reporter called Nicholas Witchell, who reports a lot on the royal family, he came up to do the interview, and when we were standing on the loch side where this happened, he said to her, Mrs. Mackay, could it have been a seal? And she looked at him and said, don't be silly, I know a seal when I see one. So it wasn't a seal. She never saw any long neck, no humps, no loops in the water. In fact, nobody ever describes loops in the water except when they're inventing a story. So whatever she saw need not have been what became later a plesiosaur in Loch Ness. Now, after her, we had the surgeon's picture, as you say, and that all turned out to be a practical joke by a surgeon who lived in London. He came up with a camera, and they'd actually faked the pictures up already. He was given the camera with the shots already taken, went into a chemist in Inverness and asked for them to be developed. He couldn't describe what he saw at all to the chemist. And yet, when you look at the surgeon's picture, it's just crystal clear that it is some sort of long-necked beast. Back in the 90s, Adrian Shine, the leader of the Loch Ness Project British research group, he actually staged the whole event using a toy submarine about this long, and they mounted a fiberglass monster on the top of it. Now, there wasn't fiberglass around in the days of the surgeon's picture, but there was something called plastic wood, which was used as a filler by joiners and carpenters. And Adrian reproduced the picture almost identically. And it was just a small object about this high. So we know the surgeon's picture isn't real, but that is what gave this fire to the plesiosaur theory. And people started seeing long necks. Once when I was tour guiding at Loch Ness, trying to provide the facts about the monster to people, I used to have a bus that carried 26 passengers. And Adrian asked me if he could carry out an experiment. And when we stopped at the harbour at the Clansman Hotel, I used to take my people down to the harbour and show them photographs and tell them the story of sightings and how they gradually built up. And Adrian watched this a few times. And then on a day that I knew about, nobody else knew about, he arranged for a piece of wood. And this piece of wood was 2 inches by 2 inches. It was rigged up with ropes. And when he pulled on the rope from a hidden position, the piece of wood would come straight up out of the water and go down. The first time he did it, nobody saw anything. So that was a total disaster. The next day, he did it again, and people saw it. And in fact, I think I was, oh, look, to make them look, because they're too busy listening to me. And then Adrian appeared out of the bushes, says, oh, what did you see? What did you see? And he got everyone to draw what they saw. Now, most people, almost all of them, drew a square piece of wood, a rectangular piece of wood. But some of them had it with a neck. Some even had an eye on it. Wow. So suggestion is an important part of what goes on at Loch Ness. Doesn't mean there's no monster there, of course. It just means that you have to be very careful what you take to be evidence.
Yeah. Tony, I was going to ask about the eyewitness accounts, and you just talked about that, and probably some of the folklore, and you just gave some good examples of that. Can you talk a little bit about Operation Deep Scan? What exactly was that, and did they find anything at all?
Okay, there needs to be a little bit of background understanding before you can talk about Deep Scan. Back in the 1960s, it was decided that if you had giant telephoto cameras overlooking the loch, then maybe you'd get some film of Nessie. And that was the surface vigil. After that, we had the Americans come over from the Boston Academy of Applied Science, later moved to Concord, New Hampshire. I've been there and down to Manchester and that, so I know more or less where your lake is. Wow. Anyway, the Academy of Applied Science came over, and they started to bring some technology. Unfortunately, they were very, very good scientists in their own fields, but when they came to Loch Ness, they were playing. They didn't do things properly. The underwater camera that took the famous flipper photographs was actually mounted on a trailer step, caravan step that you're getting to go into your trailer. And of course, in the water in Loch Ness, the camera would rock backwards and forwards and photograph the bottom. And all the underwater pictures obtained by the Academy of Applied Science turned out to not be real. Some of them had been retouched, and it's never been established who retouched them. Ricky Razdan and Alan Keeler from the iScan company in Rochester, New York, I think it is, they actually came over here based on those flipper pictures with a harpoon array. They were going to harpoon the creature with a biopsy, just get a little bit of tissue out. But I did go in one day and I saw on the side, they had a proper harpoon with barbs. I think they intended if they kept getting it and couldn't get the biopsy, they were going to shoot things. So, but you'd have to ask them about whether that was their real intention. I don't know. But all this scientific work that was going on didn't really get us any further forward. Adrian Shine had gone to Loch Ness because it's very clear water and he could use an underwater camera facing upwards. If you do that, you would see the monster silhouetted against the surface. He also built a submarine that he could sit in there and just watch. They got nothing. So he decided to come back to Loch Ness with scanning sonar, and they did long patrols up and down the loch. They got results, 40 strong sonar contacts that appeared to be stronger than anything you would be likely to find in Loch Ness. So what do you do? How do you find out what they are? Well, one plan was maybe to send a camera down the sonar beam, so it would track the sonar beam as it went down. But of course, the moment the camera enters the sonar beam, you'd lose the sonar contact. And it was too sophisticated, they couldn't do it. So the next stage was to go for Operation Deep Scan. 20 boats side by side would take a curtain of sound all the way up and down Loch Ness. If anything went through it, 3 or 4 faster boats would come overhead, fix the position, and also use scanning sonar to see what it was doing. And on the first day, I was out on the main boat that first day, we got 3 contacts and positions were fixed on each of them. No contacts on the return trip from Fort Augustus. Daryl Lowrance had calibrated the strongest contact. And he said, bigger than shark, smaller than whale. Now, some people laughed at that and said, well, you know, a shark can be a dogfish and a whale can be a small porpoise. But we all know what Daryl Lowrance meant. He meant it was something substantial. And it's been left at that. Nobody has ever managed to get any closer to Nessie since then. So that's 1987. So we really don't know what those contacts were.
Given that we still don't know, you know, what some of these creatures might be, or you know, what's causing some of these, you know, data points, you know, what are some of the theories? Can you talk about the plesiosaur theory? Can you talk about the sturgeon theory?
It can't be a reptile because it wouldn't survive. A reptile needs to be able to bask in the warmth, or at least live in a warm environment. So you really rule out reptiles unless they could be warm-blooded. And we do know that some dinosaurs, when you examine their skeletons, you can see that they might have had a warm blood. So was there a possibility that some sort of plesiosaur could also have had warm blood? There's no evidence that they did, but perhaps one evolved. So what else is left? You'll have invertebrates, giant squid. Unfortunately, Loch Ness is freshwater. So anything like a squid would have to have come in from the sea sometime after the Ice Age. And there's no such thing as an invertebrate that can move, a large invertebrate that can move from saltwater to freshwater. So you really rule out the giant squids, octopuses, anything of that nature. I had a sighting.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah. From my house. It was during the trials of Operation Deep Scan, which was 1986. And I lent my cameras to Jane Shine, Adrian's first wife, because she was photographing the trial expedition. So I came out of my house. There's a hump in the water. First time I've ever seen anything I dashed back in. I had a pair of binoculars of which one eye worked. They say the window cleaner has the dirtiest windows. The monster hunter has a pair of broken binoculars. And I looked through the one eye of this thing, and it was a bigger black object. Ran back in again and grabbed my wife's Canon short shot, one of these little click and take film cameras, and I started taking pictures. And then I thought, oh, wonder if there's a film in it. I looked down and there was, but it was at 23. And I thought, well, it might be a 24 or it could be a 36. Those of you who use digital cameras listening to this, it's all going to be nonsense, of course. But I looked back up and I thought, well, I'll wait to see if it does anything different. And when I looked back up, it had gone, completely vanished, no sign of it. I gave the film to Adrian Shine. He got it developed under bond so that there couldn't be any tampering. And when we looked at them, sitting out over a coffee in the Drumwood Rocket Hotel, he looked at the pictures and can't see anything really. You can just see an object there. And he said, let me see the negatives. And he picked up the negatives and he says, you stopped photographing. There's 3 blank frames at the end. I said, oh yes. Well, why was that? Why did you stop? And I couldn't remember. And then suddenly it came to me. I said, ah, yes. I looked down at the counter, looked back up. I've realized it had gone. And Adrian says, ah, Tony, that's when it flew away.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah.
he thinks I saw ducks.
Yeah.
Maybe it did.
Yeah.
And you come to the final category, which is fish. Some sort of huge fish. Now you get sturgeon in your country, a lot of them. Do you know what the size of the world record sturgeon is?
No idea.
27 feet long.
Wow.
And it was 200, and I think it was 270 years old. Sturgeon could maybe be the solution at Loch Ness. But of course, we all know that in Glen Lake, it must be a plesiosaur, and it always will be.
Yeah.
Anything some clot from Scotland says, it's not going to affect what you believe over there.
Yeah. You mentioned the Loch Ness Monster Exhibition Center, and I believe that you helped found it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's one of the big disasters of my life, in a sense, because I came up with the whole idea, approached the local hotelier, we decided to go into business together. I would set up and run the exhibition. He'd provide the money and arrange for grants from the local council, and we set up the exhibition in 1980. And it was just a few buildings behind the Drumwood Rocket Hotel. It wasn't until 3 years later I discovered I didn't own any of it. I was just a manager. Today, Adrian Shine has control of the exhibition. And Adrian Shine has turned it into a rather lovely multimedia presentation. And you walk through various areas that tell you about the history of Loch Ness and also the history of the Loch Ness sightings. And it's very cleverly done. And
as we mentioned in the very beginning, Tony's an author. His specialty is science fiction, and his style is similar to that of Arthur C. Clarke, and some say Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury as well. Tony, what are some of the titles and themes of your books, and where would somebody who's interested in reading them find them? Are they available on Amazon, for example?
yes, they're all on Amazon. I found that what science fiction I was reading was tending to be more and more space opera and galactic battles and shoot 'em ups and invasions of Earth and all this. And I thought, why not write some science fiction that deals with probably real situations? What would have really happened if an alien came to Earth? It wouldn't be likely to want to take us over. I mean, how would you get everybody from light years away to where we are now? So I started trying to write factual, realistic science fiction. And some of the books, The Visitor is about an object found in among the space junk that is gradually being removed from orbit around the Earth. And that was an alien object. And the whole book is about that. Another one is a series of books where there is something on the moon, which is, of course, something we know is dead, but something had been hibernating there. And one of the astronauts studying a crater got infected by this thing. And that began a sort of existential fight to try and save the colony on the moon, and also to stop it getting back to Earth. And that's developed into 5 books. So it wasn't actually a parasite. It was something else entirely. And those books start with one called Moonscape. And anyone who goes to my website can find a free copy of Moonscape. You can download it to your Kindle or other e-reader. So the website's harmsworth.net, just my name, .net.
Yeah. And Tony, you also wrote Loch Ness, Nessie Me, which is the
That's right.
definitive book about Loch Ness and Loch Ness Monster. And we will have some autographed copies of that available at the Glen Lake Swim this year.
Yeah, this is a version that was produced for Urquhart Castle. You are not allowed to sell anything in Urquhart Castle that uses the word Nessie. So I had to have a version produced that did not say Loch Ness, Nessie and Me. So it became Loch Ness Understood. But it's the same book, basically. And yes, so 300 and something pages, a lot of illustrations in it. And me pulling the plug, I'm afraid, on the back of it.
Yep. Well, Tony, this was a really, really interesting conversation. I want to thank you very much for spending this last hour with us, and it was terrific.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.